Hello, everyone. This is Chloe Lim with Becker's Healthcare. Thank you for joining us today for AI's tipping point in oncology, what's working in practice. With that, I'll hand things over to the Viz.ai team.
Thank you, Chloe, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. My name is Rebecca Maniego, Senior Director of Oncology Care Pathways at Viz, and a clinical oncology pharmacist by background. We're going to spend the next hour having a real conversation about what's happening in oncology right now, the pressures, the promise of AI, and what it actually takes to move forward. I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Tim Showalter, Dr. Michael Karuta, and Dr. Doug Flora, who are all on the front lines of this very question.
I'm Tim Showalter, a practicing radiation oncologist and chief medical officer at Viz. It's an honor to help host this timely discussion along with Rebecca. Before we get into the substance of the discussion, I first want to hear from each of our guests and give them a moment to introduce yourselves and share where you are with AI right now. So maybe Dr. Flora, let's start with you. Please tell us your role and one way AI has shown up in your clinical life.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Doug Flora. I'm a practicing medical oncologist for about the last 25 years or so. I live in Cincinnati, and I run a bunch of cancer centers here as the clinical chief for St. Elizabeth's Healthcare as executive medical director. Tim, as you know, as you're my partner in crime there, we started an AI and precision oncology peer-reviewed journal a few years ago. And so I got a head start a bit for some centers. So we're using it all the places, everywhere we can for screening, for prevention, for risk detection. And I know we'll get into that in more detail.
Well, thanks so much, Doug. And Dr. Karuta, how about we hear from you? Tell us about your role and how you're using AI in clinical practice.
Yeah, thank you very much. Real honor to be on this with both of you. So my name's Michael Karuta. I'm a practicing radiation oncologist in the Chicago area. A little earlier in my career, I'm coming up on 4 years post-training now. I got my residency training at Case Western out of Cleveland, Ohio. I would consider myself, I think, probably an early adopter of AI in my clinical practice. You know, it was just starting to become a thing when I was getting ready to graduate. And I think from the early days of like GPT-3 and all of that, which seems like an eternity ago now, I think I started probably the same way a lot of folks got started in the clinic, using it mostly for administrative tasks, writing letters for me, that sort of thing. But it's just come such a long way. And now, trying to find individualized solutions for my patients, reducing the burden of document review, just trying to bring some efficiency to my clinic. That's really how it's become useful for me.
Awesome. Thank you both. So really, before we jump into AI, I really want to start with what the problem is. Let's anchor into that. What is the problem that we're trying to solve? And so I'll start with you, Dr. Flora. And when you think about where your practice is most fragile, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
I think we all understand medicine is growing under its own weight right now. We are overwhelmed with studies, with data, too much data, and not enough organization. Lots of mishaps and mistakes that are happening, especially on the margins. And those of us that work away from the academic ivory tower certainly know that feeling well when you detect the difference in the gap between the care that you know that is available to patients and the care that you see delivered in some of these communities that are a bit south of me. So for me, the AI is going to be one of the ways that we lead the way into a little bit more equity and reducing the burdens that we're currently feeling in healthcare.
Yeah. And so Dr. Karuta, when you think about the information burden in your practice today, so not AI, just the volume of clinical data that you're expected to synthesize, where does that break down?
Yeah, I just want to echo some of what Dr. Flora said. It's just the sheer volume of it. I work in a community hospital, but we're in a major dense urban area and as part of a much larger health network, one of the biggest ones in the country. And we just get so many sources, disparate sources of data from all of the various other touch points our patients have in a very dense healthcare system in the city here. So, we're within throwing distance of maybe 4 or 5 other academic centers, maybe a dozen other community hospitals, private practices. So at each of those contact points for the patient, there's a bunch of data that we may or may not be able to discover easily. And it's just such a challenge to really have to sort through all of that. And some of those sources are contradictory on top of that, right? Or they are referring to outdated guidelines. So, and then on top of that, I need to integrate that all into my own documentation, right? So it's just that, like Dr. Flores said, it's just this compounding burden of information that's just hitting us every day.
Yeah, that really resonates with my own experience. Right, your both comments from both of you that, I routinely when I see a prostate cancer patient will have a PDF of outside information that's 200 plus pages. Plus, I've got information in my own chart to filter through, and just the massive volume of it. It has exploded over time, and the number of tests that now that we need to render a recommendation for precision therapy has expanded that even more. I'm curious, maybe start with you, Dr. Kruta, because you mentioned guidelines and how that, sometimes they're changing, and you said referring to older guidelines. I've seen a stat that it now requires reading 22 out of 24 hours a day just to keep up with the high quality oncology journals. And obviously guidelines change constantly. And how do you and your broader team realistically stay current with all that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think for someone who's not that far outside of residency, I was surprised even being warned that, oh, hey, eventually, things are going to advance. The pace of new publications, the pace of new guidelines, it's just accelerating. And that's great. I mean, that's what we want right in the field. It's just that the amount of progress we're making, and I think AI plays a big part in that, just seems to be continually getting faster and faster. So, we're all oncologists. I think in our field, I think we have a good culture of lifelong learning. And so, you sort of prepare for that, but you've got to be proactive. I think making sure we're attending all the major conferences. I try to bring some of my team with me when I go to ASCO or Astro. Staying up to date, at least on the mainline recommendations in NCCN, incredibly important. That's the floor, right? And making sure that I'm providing that education, not just for myself, but then also for my colleagues in the community. I think that there have been a number of really powerful AI tools that have become generally available to everyone. And I think without those, it would be really challenging for me to stay as up to date as I have been. It's a point of pride for me that I'm able to keep up with that. So interacting with these tools, I think, how would I put this? Bring the high yield elements from the top publications that are coming out every year to the fore for discussion, either amongst ourselves or even with the AI about the salient points, for a given clinical case even, right? And allow us to really individualize the care for that patient from the cutting edge. So it's a process for sure. It's a process, and it's about just continually educating myself and then disseminating that to the team.
Doug, this is where I think it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts because, as a medical oncologist, a lot of the new advances, maybe a new drug, and to evaluate the new targeted therapy, you might need to have already had a precision medicine test done. And I know you're really up on this space as editor of AI and Precision Oncology and as a practicing oncologist. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, how close is like an ideal AI powered vision of precision oncology to reality. What are you seeing in your practice?
We're getting there. I think Dr. Kruta was suggesting a few tools. There are 4 or 5 out there that are filling the gap for us. There's 144,000 articles on PubMed last year listed indexed to oncology. So obviously nobody's keeping up. Even the best of us that are sub specialized are having trouble keeping track of the updates in our own field, much less all of general oncology. So I would say where I'm using it daily, my second screen is always open to my LLM of choice or two. Everything I read is dropped in there. The PDFs are analyzed, the statistics, basically build a journal club product or a project for me in my LLM so that instead of going through 14 pages of articles, now I'm going through the 3-page summary that was trained on the things that I said I cared about, saving a ton of time. And then what I often will do is save a 1-pager, and that's my review for that. And that goes in a separate file so that I can pull it up. It's just one of those ways that I'm trying to figure out How do I digest the appropriate information to make sure that I've got everything at close hand, but recognize that it's moving faster than I can?
It's a great perspective, Doug. It seems like really a great angle on using AI to help cut through a lot of that noise and to streamline the digestion and actionability of all of this new data. I'm curious to, I know you've written quite a bit on the challenges of like physician burnout and feelings of being overwhelmed within current cancer care, and how that coupled with fragmentation can contribute to misses and variability in care and failure to deliver the quality precision oncology vision that is upon us as a possibility. And I'm curious in terms of like scoping out the problem with your lens of what's possible with AI. What do you see right now within your system? Like where are the opportunities for the busy clinicians to really make improvements in their practice day to day?
Right now it's probably the less sexy stuff. The back of the store functions, business intelligence is ready. We've got a lot of help coming this year and last in rev cycle management, prior authorization, billing and coding, those sorts of things. I think are easier for our teams to understand and accept before we drift into the clinical decision making, which I think arrives this year. I would say the clinicians probably are still cautious, but growing increasingly optimistic. And I guess what I would ask for the audience that's a little bit more skeptical is, what are you comparing to? Right now, we spend more money on healthcare than any other developed country, and we rank like 38th in outcomes. We understand that we need the help. And so for me, I'd like the clinicians to get involved early and help design some of the tools that are solving the problems that we say we want solved.
Yeah, Doug, I'm curious to hear you say a little more about that for our listeners, because I know from prior discussions that when you ask what are you comparing to, I know there's a little bit more of a story there, which is essentially like, are you comparing to ideal or are you comparing to what actually happened? So let's say more about that, please.
Yeah, I think it's important. For me, where I get frustrated, I'll use the car analogy. I drive a Tesla, no surprise, I'm a tech nerd. And there's pretty good evidence that full self-driving cars reduce wrecks by about 92% compared to people who actually drive. That's not the narrative, because you read about one guy who fell asleep in the back seat of his car and ran into a truck in Arizona, and then that dismantles everything. And I think that's what happened in medicine. Maybe somebody experimented with one of the early frontier models and it hallucinated. That's not the model that exists today. And so when we compare the areas that AI can improve, I want to be compared to the real thing. Don't say AI has to the best oncologist at the best center at the Ivory Tower in Boston every single time. How about, can it be better than what's actually being delivered 10 counties south of me this month? And it can. And so I guess what I want to ask of my oncology brethren is focus on that, focus on the lens, and where can it improve equity? Where can it improve screening and early detection? And these tools are here to be used intelligently, not blindly. And so I guess where I say what, compared to what, let's compare it to what's actually happening in your center and those gaps that we all know exist. And maybe those things can narrow that gap just a bit.
It's a great vantage point, Doug. And I would echo, it's not just what is the care system, is every provider, up to speed on every cancer, but also, even the best of us, we're still human. And occasionally we get overwhelmed or we have a busy day, that sort of thing. To carry forward like the sort of like cockpit analogy of what's happening when we're engaging with technology and working in our jobs, I think one of the key parts of that is the EHR, obviously. And Michael, maybe I'd love to hear your perspective on this. That surveys have shown that about half of clinicians cite the EHR as one of their top stressors in the workplace. That it's part of the chore of being a physician in modern medicine, and that strikes me as more of a technology complaint, really, than anything in terms of the tools that we have available to us. And it also ends up being a delivery problem in the end. And I'm curious how that shows up in your daily practice, and how do you feel about the current tools that are available to you? Like, how often do you feel like you have all the resources available to you when you're seeing a patient?
Yeah, that's a great question. I I think it kind of, it kind of goes back to something we were discussing earlier, just about the sort of data deluge sort of issue. I would believe that statistic in the sense that the EHR is a central location where all of this data is being piled on you. So I would agree it is probably the biggest stressor in that it is sort of the backdrop to all of the other substressors, right? Which is having to wrangle all of this complexity in the amount of information and different sources that we have to integrate as part of our job. And honestly, the tools that I have access to, and I'm sure a lot of folks are in a similar situation, are not optimized to really help us tackle that. A lot of them are native to the EHR that we use, and are not, in my opinion, up to the speed that we're seeing with foundational LLMs and that level of progress. So the unfortunate truth is that a lot of times, since I've started my clinical practice, I'm building a team of other humans to help me sort of create a workaround around a lot of this stuff. The way we handle the burnout is I'm distributing it, right? It's not just me wrangling these documents. It's my nurse navigator. It's some other subset of team members that we're sort of ad hoc pulling in to help me get my arms around it to get the best outcomes for our patients. So I think I'm still waiting for a really good clinical solution to help me tackle that. I think a lot of other fields are moving ahead with those solutions. And I know that healthcare just has a lot more complexity, a lot more human elements. And it really feels like we should be about there. Right now, it's really about distributing the workload when I feel like it should be about leveraging the technology.
Yeah, that's great. So let's switch gears a little bit. We haven't covered clinical trials yet, which I think everybody on this call knows is a major priority for oncology. Unfortunate reality is that fewer than 5% of eligible oncology patients are actually enrolling in trials, and nearly 20 to 40% of trials are failing to hit those enrollment goals. So I would love to know from both of you, and we can start with you, Dr. Karuta, what's the real barrier in your experience? Is this an awareness problem? Is it a eligibility complexity, workflow friction, or where does that actually play out?
Probably all of the above. And I think, different practices are probably dealing with this issue in a myriad of ways. And again, I think that there is a big gap there in terms of how technology is assisting us with this problem. But in my particular practice, again, we sort of throw more human capital at it. And I don't know that that's always the answer, especially in the current environment. I know a lot of healthcare systems are understaffed. It's difficult to find qualified people. We have a couple dedicated research support specialists that sort of help ease the workflow friction from my perspective. So, the biggest problem that I still deal with is really awareness. And, if you're running a busy community clinical practice, obviously we all want to contribute to the big cooperative group trials. But when your day gets out of control and you're seeing, 6, 7 consults, you've got a myriad of other patient issues you need to take care of. Sometimes that clinical trial, it may even be one that you champion, right, for your center, may not be top of mind. You may just be focused on getting your patients where they need to be, right? And it feels like leveraging the technology there should be relatively easy with how good AI has gotten. It's just in our current EHR or native systems, there's not a pop-up that automatically flags a patient for eligibility or anything like that and brings my awareness to it, right? Like Dr. Showalter was saying, it's just, I think we really need to stop shooting for perfect, right? I mean, if it catches a handful more patients than I'm already able to pre-screen in my own mind as I'm going into the room and reviewing all their imaging and kind of going through all these other things, we can make incremental gains, right? I think that's important, but there's just so much low-hanging fruit there from my perspective that we really need to tackle that.
Yeah. How about you, Dr. Flora?
I think it's a perfect use case. We talk about where can the early adopters find comfort. Large language models, AI, it's the great pattern recognizer. And what is a better thing to do than scrape the entire medical record to say, does this list on cancer.gov match this list of exclusion and inclusion criteria garnered from the chart? That takes all of those media tab scanned 200-page PDFs that Tim was referring to. It takes all the molecular phenotyping. It takes all of the pathology reports and scans and staging and puts it into one document, says this patient should be eligible for this trial, and can send an alert to the CRC or the CRN, saving them that hour or two. For us, we've got about 50, maybe 45 people doing research in our cancer program, and I don't have any spare people. So the idea that these screenings can happen instantaneously and automatically, reproducibly, I think that's a great use case. And I'm surprised more aren't leaning into that sort of thing. Tumor board automation, clinical trial screening, registry. Those things are things where we collect data professionally, usually with heavy doses of manpower and FTEs that are hard to find. And that's an easy, low risk, high rescue space for us in the cancer world to get a one pager that says this patient's eligible for this clinical trial. I love it.
Well, it's interesting to hear these perspectives. So like there's some recurring themes that are coming up, like sharing the burden for a lot of labor intensive tasks, fragmentation, high volumes of data, whether it's coming from data that's patient specific that might reside in multiple different data silos throughout the health systems in the area, or it's shifting guidelines and shifting precision medicine, and also whether it's connecting patients to clinical trials. It's clear that we are dealing with a lot of challenges in this space. And these are the sort of challenges that on the Viz side, we've been thinking a lot about and that we've built some tools to address. And maybe this is a good time to transition to showing you just a couple slides that shares what Viz has been up to in the oncology space as an example for what's possible with AI in terms of making an impact. So let me transition to sharing my screen, and we'll show you some examples of the solutions that we're building. So what we're doing with Viz Oncology is built around one idea, which is to enable personalized medicine for cancer patients at scale. And it sounds ambitious, but there are some specific elements that are mechanistic in nature and connect to the Viz platform overall. So one is finding patients and building connections throughout the entire health system. So not just the cancer center service line, but the entire system. And then making that longitudinal. So not just for initial diagnosis, like enabling tumor boards when a patient first enters the system, but making sure that it's connected throughout the patient journey, because many times something new will happen for a patient when only one cancer specialist is seeing that patient, or when no cancer patient is seeing that patient, and there's an opportunity to pull them into the next best step of care for them. So the idea is to identify patients, connect them throughout the system, and then provide guideline-based next steps that the whole care team can use to coordinate the right steps for each patient. And Michael, in your words, to make sure that we're sharing the responsibility for the entire team that's involved. So just for context, Viz is already operating across 2,000 hospitals. The platform offers more than 50 FDA-cleared solutions. And that same infrastructure is applied to the Viz Oncology suite. So health systems already often have Viz products deployed for other care areas like stroke or heart failure or pulmonary embolism. And so it gives the opportunity to connect what's happening on the oncology side through the Viz platform to other areas of care within the health system. So the Viz Oncology focus addresses three main problems, and this connects with what our conversation is focused on so far in terms of the pain points that we're all facing. So one is addressing the problem of incomplete testing and awareness for the rapidly evolving space of precision medicine. So creating an opportunity to address missing tests and other bits of information that are needed to fuel the latest in guideline-based recommendations, for example, for targeted therapies. Second is enabling guideline adherence. So guidelines change constantly. As clinicians, when we're in busy practices, and Michael, to your point, seeing 6 or 7, consults in a busy day, we want to make sure that we are aware of the latest guidelines that are applicable just to the patient in front of us, and that are important for driving that decision. And then lastly is clinical trial enrollment. So we know that nationally we have a challenge with not enrolling a sufficient number of cancer patients. So numbers I've seen are still around 5% of eligible patients. And so the idea here is to address this in a patient-specific way that embeds all of these aspects inside the workflow in a way that engages both the oncologist and the rest of the care team. One of the things I like a lot as a radiation oncologist is that what I worry about sometimes is asking my colleagues in other disciplines to serve as like a kind of a practice radiation oncologist if I haven't met the patient yet. And what I mean by that is being aware of all of the evolving indications for, say, oligometastatic cancers, or knowing when early palliative radiation could really alter the disease course for a patient, or evolving things like benign conditions that can respond to low-dose radiation therapy, which is a really new area for our space. And so I think this is a really promising area where you can really engage the entire multidisciplinary team throughout the patient journey to make sure that patients are getting into the right place. So that's something that addresses a real pain point that I've observed in my career. The way the workflow is structured overall is that like other tools within the Viz platform, Viz ingests all the information, EHR notes, the things that wind up in a PDF from another health system, pathology, genomics, imaging, turns that into an AI-powered chart summary that's organized by the clinical area and events. And then from there, that information is used in the workflow to surface patient-specific NCCN guideline recommendations, to flag missing tests or other bits of information that then the care team can run down, and then also to identify clinical trials that are available in the system that patient could be considered for. And I think having that all in one place and having it available throughout the system is really an example of what AI can do for serving the multidisciplinary team. And then just one other example that I think is a really good use case for this like cross health system connectivity that the Viz platform is designed to offer. And this is an example of our incidental pulmonary nodule workflow. So we have this tool, a lot of radiology departments are currently managing long lists of patients who have pulmonary nodules that are found on a CT scan, often for a non-cancer reason. And sometimes the pulmonologists are handling this as well. And so the platform helps the health system manage that patient population at scale, provides all of the EMR information to help superpower the care teams so they can move faster, aligns that with national guidelines. And then as a next step, the way it connects into the Viz Oncology suite is that if that patient is diagnosed with early stage lung cancer, it's a seamless transition to what are the guideline-based next steps. And so it just connects through early molecular testing all the way through treatment. So that's a good example of something that, in order to have that longitudinal look for the patient and to ensure that they're not falling through gaps along the way, you actually have to start before they even enter the cancer center. And so I think that's one real opportunity that we have within the health system broadly. So I'll maybe pass it back to Rebecca, maybe to lead some follow-up discussion from that.
Yeah, thanks, Tim, for giving us that overview. I'm curious now, Dr. Flora, Dr. Karuta, after watching what Tim just went through, what resonated, and then where does skepticism still exist? We can start with you, Dr. Flora.
I think it's great. You guys, what I have stressed, and I talk about this a lot, this probably 20 weeks a year. I really like that you guys are looking at an end-to-end solution. That's a big deal to me. We can't buy point solutions at my center to solve 200 different problems. And so I like that you can move through from the very front door through the other areas. And I think that's going to be fundamental for those of us that are out there shopping. As you start to implement these CDS tools, I think you're seeing finally the applications the doctors have been craving, which is, help us. help us do our jobs, help us in a seamless, integrated way so that we're not clicking 18 more times. And I love that your stuff is running in the background. It's a tough spot as an oncologist because it's really not about the economics at this point. It's not about the strength of the frontier models. It's about who gets to trust first. And I think if you can solve trust and you can make us understand where your data came from, NCCN is gold to us, and then start to ease those steps in the process. The Lean Six Sigma black belt in me loves process. And I love automating as much as I can to reduce the risk that we're overwhelmed and making an error on accident, not on purpose, because some radiologist has to read 120 films at night. And they're tired. And I love the idea that there's some overreads that are starting to happen. And that's where I think the power of the possible lands.
That's great. So how about you, Dr. Karuta? What resonated, and then what are you still skeptical about in this space?
Yeah, I mean, I think just want to echo everything Dr. Flora said. I think that was very eloquently put. Again, I think it looks like it's addressing the core problem comprehensively. I think that's really important. And yeah, not to repeat too much of what you said, Doug, but I don't want a solution where I am having to click in and out of something else, right? I want it to sit where the problems are, right on top of the EHR, my biggest stressor. I want it to address things in situ there. So this is very compelling. Where I remain skeptical, I think something I've been doing at my home institution is encouraging the institution to try to participate in the early rollout of some of these tools. I think that, we come again from a field that's very disciplined in evaluating the efficacy of any new intervention, right? And making sure we do that rigorously so we're getting the best thing for our patients. And I think it's important to do that for these tools too, for us and for our teams. Just being able to evaluate, well, in a rigorous fashion, how much are they actually helping us, right? So I think it's important for me, for any tool, whether it be from Viz.ai or some other vendor, that we do immediately get a QI project around it, test it out, be able to give our feedback to it, right? This is the imminent future. This is not, this is going to be our present very soon. And I think it's important for all health systems to really, to some degree, participate in the development of these solutions as they're evaluating them, and make them as useful for your team as possible, right? So yeah, I mean, again, that tool sounded fantastic. And I think, just for any individual team, mine included, I think being able to get my hands on tools like these, try them out and do some rigorous testing, make sure that we're actually getting the benefit we're seeking would be really important for me.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think that tracks. I think it's ultimately, even in my role as Chief Medical Officer of Viz, one thing that I think is incumbent upon our teams is to make sure that we're generating evidence constantly. So, QI projects, multi-center pilot studies to show that implementation actually improves patient outcomes. So it needs to be a value story that focuses on observable outcomes, both for providers and for patients, ultimately, who matter, the most. And evidence is a big part of that trust equation. And Doug, I want to turn it to you for the overall trust question overall for what AI companies should be thinking about from a trust perspective and how the health system should be approaching this. You're smack in the middle of the rapidly evolving space for AI within cancer care. And I've heard you say before that you and other health system executives are just being absolutely inundated with AI pitches, and that most demos look identical, right? And so how do you distinguish between, really convincing team pitching you with a deck that's very compelling, versus like a real partner who can build with you and make sure that things translate into measurable outcomes for a health system? What should a health system be looking for?
Yeah, Tim, I think that's the big question for us. So, you hear AI developers and they're on roller skates, right? The technology is moving so ridiculously fast that they can't keep up. Labor economists are going on about jobs and what might happen. But I think the pace of diffusion is the part that they're missing on that on that axis. And so for us in healthcare, the rate limiting step for us isn't the technology. It's not even the economics of it. It's that trust building that you're talking about. And so I would say for vendors, for Viz, for others, that trust building to me, that's not a bug to route around. That is the product. Whoever wins the trust building faster will win healthcare. And what we are looking for is the purchasers is I need to know that there's good data in, right? And that has to be clear and available to us. Black boxes scare doctors. We want to show our work. And so that's important. I want to make sure that the data that you guys use to train models is representative of the people in my charge. If I live in a predominantly Black population or Asian population and the models didn't use those to train, then I don't want to safely extrapolate without thinking on that, because that's a bigger deal to me than, and we do the same thing with clinical trials. And then I think maybe the part that I mentioned earlier about the mixed use for you guys, what's the danger if we don't do it? And so I think when I talk to docs and when you guys are out there, and Tim and I know each other quite well, we've been friends for a while, that's the question that I ask is if we don't do this, who are we missing? If we aren't using augmented reads of mammograms, if we're not using augmented reads of CT scans for a pulmonary nodule, and you see the number of people who never get pulmonary follow-up, that creates moral injury for me, and I think that if we had that sort of gap in care in delivery of chemotherapeutics or immunotherapies, there'd be an outrage. Yet here we are 8 years after Ethan Bosch's articles were published on remote patient monitoring, and we're still not using it, even though there's a 5-month survival advantage. So that's where I write every week on LinkedIn or Substack about this, trying to just light people up and say, we've done this before in the COVID era. We are able to move faster. And it just bugs me that something can sit on a person's desk and say, oh, we'll get to that next quarter, when it might save 5 more lives if you did the right thing.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue. But go ahead, Dr. Cruda.
I just want to touch on one point there too. Completely agree. And I think that sometimes what I'm seeing too is sort of, how do I put this? It's not sitting on your hands, but the rate of progress is too slow. The point I wanted to touch on, Dr. Flora, is you mentioned the black box. And I think that does really create a lot of trust issues, even with the existing products you might have in your healthcare system. I'll say that the tools that I have access to that are ostensibly there to help me improve my efficiency, not tunable in any way, right, to my own clinical practice. Getting in touch with the teams who could potentially help me do that, although there are a lot of, I'll call them safeguards, I guess, to some extent on a lot of these tools, and render them really as something I need to work around if I want to use them at all, right? And I think that that is a really important point. Like, these systems can't be black boxes, right? But vendors for these systems that really have to become true partners with the healthcare systems and work on tuning them for their particular use case in that system, in that community. I mean, just like we do with our EHRs, right? They're basically all an individualized instance for any particular system. So I think that really damages the trust from my perspective for the tools that I already have access to. I barely use them because I have no control over how they work. And frankly, I don't think they work very well as they are out of the box, so to speak. So.
Yeah, I'd like to dig in there a little bit more, because I do like the recognition that you have, Dr. Flora, about perhaps we were moving much quicker during COVID, and we've sort of come back to the old ways of making things go through all these approvals. And, I'm right in the middle of this now, and it is months to years to get something. It's not the clinician buy-in. I have clinicians dying to use these tools. And then what happens next is this long, drawn out implementation. Purgatory is what I call it. But how do we actually drive back to that urgency? And like, you've been successful at St. Elizabeth. So, what things are you doing to get these types of tools activated within your system?
Yeah, it's tough. And I would say we have some of the same issues, and it is that part of healthcare where you have one foot on the dock and one foot in the canoe, because we have to innovate, but we can't afford any mishaps. It's too important. So, I understand. And I think the people in my tribe that are working towards these goals understand that we want to be realists about the technologies. And if we don't own the successes, we don't, and we don't own the failures, then, that's sort of an optimistic view of the real world. And I'd like to consider both. What I would say is during COVID, I was able to open a clinical trial in 2 weeks. if we needed to set up a blood draw station outside. I know Emily Tolukian has talked about it, her practice in South Carolina. She ordered the tent online and set it up in the front yard of their cancer centers. And I think when the emergency went away, the urgency left. But I'd say there are going to be 250 cancer deaths while we're on this webinar. And so I don't know that to me feels great that we're not working with urgency. And so when my committees here want to go through an IT committee and a governance committee, and then it's legal for 6 months. And I understand your frustration, Rebecca. I have the same. And I know everyone's trying to do their own individual jobs well to protect the small area of their worlds that they're responsible for protecting. But my job in the white coat is to remind the people of the patients. And if I know we can increase our diagnostics rate for lung nodule or earlier detection on mammography, which has been very, very clearly demonstrated. In fact, the new level 1 evidence added the NCCN a few weeks ago to risk stratify women with a risk for breast cancer. I feel a compulsion to bring this up again and again, meeting after meeting, to the point that many people are probably rolling their eyes at this point. I've been a cancer patient, and I may demand a little bit better of my system and others by banging the drum. And I guess the more clinicians we can motivate with talks like this, the better, because they are great authorities in their own buildings.
That's great. Do you have any thoughts there, Dr. Kruta?
I think things that resonate when I'm making the case to our leadership structure at my institution about how important it is to really move on a lot of these systems. It really comes down to, and I appreciate Dr. Flora focusing on the patient. I think when I make the case, it really comes down to maybe not being left behind and leaving our communities with a substandard, essentially, substandard care product for our patients. So I completely agree. I was in residency during COVID. That made a lot of changes that really accelerated, uptake of a variety of new processes that I think really did push healthcare forward. And I think sitting back while we're essentially going through a change just as disruptive, I think is something that we can't afford to do as clinicians, but then, for our health systems, I think really can't afford to do. I think we're just leaving a lot on the table for our patients. And I think that's really what I try to emphasize when I'm trying to make the case, for really pushing ahead in this area.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. And some of it's just seems to me it's like communicating the type of urgency. And Doug, I like your analogy to COVID and just trying to, I think people are so used to cancer as being something we've been dealing with for decades and talking about the fight for it. It just seems like it's a chronic issue. But when we have new tools to make things better, it's really appealing to do something. I guess to extend that a little bit, particularly in light of your role, Doug, as a physician executive who's got responsibilities for multiple cancer centers in your community, I'm curious to transition a little bit towards the subject of variability in guidelines adherence, particularly in a network when you've got multiple centers, multiple different providers, and I'm wondering how you think about a tool that surfaces cancer guidelines, be it NCCN or some other sort of standard practice. Institutional guidelines could be another example. And it's at the point of care and inside the workflow. Where do you see that adding value at the health system level? What's the most compelling thing that comes to mind there?
Great timing that you would ask that, because I asked that question to my own clinicians this week. So we purchased a guidelines product back in the old days in 2018. And we have probably 93, 94% compliance rates for our medical oncologists until we stopped measuring, because it was many, many months in a row. And I was revisiting that cost this week as we're deciding how to renew, what to renew. And I put that question to some of our medical oncology leads, and they actually really like the product. They said specifically it helps them when they are seeing a patient that's a little bit outside of their subspecialty. So at St. Elizabeth, everybody's subspecialized. We have majors and minors. And so the lung cancer team might occasionally pick up a colon cancer patient on inpatient rounds and hold on to that patient. And I think that's where some of the value is if you get a little bit beyond where your primary comfort zone is. I use the same thing I talked about the LLM on my second screen. Pretty good breast cancer doctor. I'm not looking up a lot of breast cancer data, but I'm absolutely loading up a picture of a rash or drug-drug interactions per colchicine in this new CML stamp inhibitor, because that's not something I do routinely every day, all day. And I find the answers to be compelling and accurate and quick. And so when we talk about clinical decision support, especially one that has the NCCN inside it, I think most clinicians like that as a safety net for us, a safety net. And certainly my doctors have told me, don't lose our package. We think it's a value well spent to have those guidelines available to us for those margin cases.
That's great. So like adjacent areas where, it's even harder to keep up with the velocity of information when it's not your primary focus area, when it's a minor focus area. Michael, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this within your own practice, like how having like workflow embedded evidence, like guidelines would be most impactful.
Yeah, I think of it much in the same way. I am lucky enough to have the ability to do some subspecialization. Radiation oncology is much smaller than medical oncology, but I do have a partner here. So we do subspecialize, but we do have to cross cover for some sites. So it's definitely helpful for that. I think community-wide, it just pulls the floor up, right? We alluded earlier to, sometimes you're going to get some patients from some other, maybe further out site that come to you, maybe treated using some guidelines that were a little bit older. Well, if your entire network could have access to these clinical decision support tools, I mean, it just, that floor becomes, whatever guideline subscription it is, NCCN is an excellent one, right? That is the floor. I mean, hopefully, that will be the minimum that your patients are getting, and it's an excellent standard. I think that that could be transformative in and of itself for oncology. And then very much so, I'm finding that I'm using these tools just to make sure that in areas where, again, I might not be as up to date on the literature, I'm still giving that individual patient, the best recommendations that I can find, and quite rapidly too, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. So one of the themes that we also hear that we haven't really touched on yet is that AI is really good at enabling clinicians to really kind of work at the top of their license. We've talked about the administrative burden that can come with all of the data discovery. Is that how you're thinking about it? Or I would love to hear your thoughts on that, Dr. Kruta.
Absolutely. Something we talk a lot about, especially more recently in our practice here, just making sure that my time is available for doing the things that only I can do, right? As a really important point of efficiency. When we're doing all of this data wrangling with the team, sometimes I'm taking off a few different hats just to make sure I'm supporting people where they need support. And it may not be the best use of my time. I could be doing, other things, getting some additional new patients in, attacking the really complex problems. Again, just another area where I think these kinds of tools can really, really help bring better care for our patients. If I'm able to go and just spend most of my processing time on those complex problems, I think that'll, again, raise the floor up for everybody if I can free myself up. So, and that's not a new problem. I think we've been talking about that in healthcare for many, many years with the use of, physician extenders, various other new human capital roles. So, we should be pushing forward with our AI tools to fill that gap as aggressively as possible. Like we have been, I think, again, throwing more people at that problem.
Yeah. Does that resonate with you too, Dr. Flora?
Yeah, think about why people fly to Houston or Boston or New York for care, right? They're seeking the greatest pattern recognizers they can find. When you fly to see a Cliff Hudis, when you go to Sloan Kettering, you know that particular doctor has the broadest fund of knowledge over 3 decades has sat in 1,000 rooms with other smart breast cancer doctors. And you hope that Cliff has the ability that maybe a general oncologist in a small community seeing leukemia followed by breast, followed by myeloma may not have yet. And I would argue that that's true. And for the longest time, we would go to these quaternary referral centers because we trusted the pattern recognition of the experts. Now, with these large language models, you have all of the brilliance of Cliff and George Sledge and Lynn and all the other breast cancer experts that you want to put on the list. It's 1,000 of them, and all of their consummate sum of knowledge is included in that tool, so that a general oncologist who's asking the right questions, who understands these large language models, can have the floor raised, to use Dr. Karuta's term, so that we all have access to all of the same information to make the same level of decisions for every single patient. That's terribly exciting to me from an equity standpoint. And I can tell you that the care that's delivered by these fantastic, hardworking oncologists in small town America, across the Midwest for me, across the Deep South, those doctors would love the help. It's a very, very taxing thing. We talk about the term oncology. Onkos is Greek for burden. And wouldn't it be nice if the oncologists who study burdens had someplace else to divest and share that burden? So I love that idea for me, that this tool is my co-pilot. It shares the burden with me to make sure that I provide the care that Cliff or Lynn or George Sledge can offer their breast cancer patients.
Doug, that's a powerful point, and I think it's having been really close to healthcare AI over the past few years as well, it really makes a lot of sense, because I think that this disease expertise is the reps of seeing a lot of patients, over and over again with that same disease area. Like for me, that's been prostate cancer. And it's being very familiar with the evidence. And it seems like AI is a really powerful tool for, putting together learnings from a bunch of different iterations and synthesizing all of the available literature. So, I mean, it's a really powerful example, the way you've articulated. I'd like to shift a little bit to getting back to the clinical trial piece. And just because it's an area that's like really dear to me. And Doug, one of the things that struck me that you said earlier in the conversation was about the number of people that are involved, just doing the labor of screening patients, throughout the system, that's supporting the clinical trial enrollment and management sort of resource that we have currently in 2026. And when you think about what's possible with AI, it's certainly appealing. Like you could embed that within the workflow. But in order to have that happen, we've got the current framework of people that we have and the tools that are available. Like, what actually happens from an implementation path? Like, who has to embrace it? What has to change about their workflow and the handoffs?
Yeah, important, because that's the thing, right? It's not about the technology anymore. It's about the change management. And I would add the other wrinkle in AI, that we have all the doomsayers out there saying jobs will be eliminated. So the very people you're trying to help may be slow rolling a little bit or sandbagging because they're concerned that their role will be eliminated. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to upskill every person I can in our institution so that they can work top up license, to use that term. So for me, I want this to be the tool that the clinical research coordinator uses to let her screen 45 new patients a day instead of 6, so that she can spend the rest of the time doing the things that stoke passions, being in the room with the patient, going down to the floor, talking to the clinician about, hey, this patient's eligible. Are you excited? This is a great trial for this patient. She needs this. And so for me, I'm earnest and I'm pretty enthusiastic about it, because I want to do two things. I want to get the patients on trial for the patient's sake, for the system's sake. I also want to unload my staff member as the executive director here to say, I don't want people to feel burnt out. I don't want people to feel overwhelmed with the amount of things being thrown at them every day, all day. And so I'm just trying to get tools in their hands that will let them do the fun parts of their job and automate the task, not the job. And for me, that's where I think AI in healthcare has a great opportunity. To this point, we've been really, really good at automating the fast tasks. But then the systems slow down when you get to a tumor board or a clinical trial screener, because those aren't the fast steps. Those are still the human steps. And I like AI's lens being turned to those people so that we can automate some of those deeper steps and let the human back into the mix, doing the things that humans do best.
I love that, Doug. I love that statement. Automate the task, not the job. And when you still have a person who owns that area, I think the opportunity is there. And one thing that is like really resonated with me is I think about the longitudinal nature, like for these time consuming things like tumor boards and clinical trial enrollment, oftentimes there's a defined period, like your consult time, where we've really focused our team. But actually there's an opportunity for the entire patient journey, to really extend what we can do. And if you can automate the task, then the job becomes broader for the person and the impact is bigger. Michael, I'm curious, before we transition to questions, to hear your thoughts on the clinical trial piece and sort of how you can picture things like this fitting into your system and what the impact would be.
One thing that really resonated with me from what Doug was saying is again, just automating away, to use your words, Tim, some of these tasks. I work in a very underserved population. Maybe a third of our patients, English is not their primary language. Culturally, there is a lot of suspicion around clinical trials. I think freeing up our staff to move away from the burden of all of the minutia that goes on with eligibility and all of that, and really focusing on the human parts of this, right? Really getting to sit down with our patients and communicate to them, what we're trying to achieve and why, how they can participate. I don't need to go over this. We all know that, our minorities in this country are drastically underrepresented in our clinical trials, and there's a lot of good historical reasons for that. And I think just getting our staff to be able to refocus around that human element, right? Let the AI take care of all of the other essentially administrative burden, I think could bring tremendous benefit to our patients and equity to our clinical trials. I think that's just a really interesting pathway for that. And I think maybe force us to look really differently about how we administer, large cooperative group trials across the country. So huge opportunity there.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I think we've covered some great themes. I think that the opportunity is clearly there, and I think sounds like we're all observing the same problems and opportunities for AI to make an impact on reducing variability, empowering all of the clinicians and all their staff to serve at the top of their license with AI and to really do a better job of providing the best possible care for cancer patients. So with that, I think we do have time to transition to audience questions for this.
Amazing. Thank you so much, speakers, for such a fruitful conversation. I'm just going to jump right into audience questions since I know we are kind of nearing our time here. For our speakers, how do you evaluate whether an AI tool is actually improving outcomes versus kind of just generating activity?
I think we're going to see a lot of that this year. And that's what I was mentioning. The trials are starting to come out. And as we see more real world evidence being shared this year from models that were built 2 or 3 years ago, I'm very excited about the outcomes-based stuff. I'll use example cancer screening. So we know traditionally, categorically, finding a cancer earlier in its faintest footsteps portends a better outcome, right? They've developed fewer mutations. They haven't maybe gotten the best blood supply yet. They're not quite as mature to fight. So we know that outcomes are better in stage 0 versus stage 1, 2, 3. What if we apply that same rule to say in stage -1? And I'm writing an article about this right now, molecular only recurrence. And that is AI, guys. When you talk about MCED and ctDNA and minimal residual disease, that is AI pattern recognition separating the cell-free DNA from the ctDNA. So for me, that's one of those exciting realms of AI that we're using every day, and we may not have even given it credit. So I love the idea that we might be able to treat an R0, R-1 that's detected by molecular recurrence with an earlier instrumentation or an earlier drug or maybe a vaccine or a CAR T cell therapy or something given once or twice before that cancer has a chance to invaginate and find blood supply.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, just going back to earlier in our conversation, I would like to see my own institution, but I think institutions more broadly really get hands-on with evaluating these models. Whatever internal QI metrics you look at, whatever kind of studies you want to do, there are a lot of really good AI tools coming out to assist with essentially micro research studies that can be done on implementing these tools. I think that's going to be important for each organization to evaluate themselves. Is this actually improving outcomes, or are we in a, I guess to borrow some words from more broadly from AI, just like a token utilization dopamine loop? Are we just feeling good about how many tokens are running through here? So, yeah, I think clinicians especially need to lead the way, but our health systems just need to get really hands-on in testing these systems out.
Amazing. Appreciate the added insight there. We are nearing our time here, so I'm going to pass it back to Tim and Rebecca for any closing thank yous and remarks before I wrap it up for us.
Well, thanks so much, Chloe. I mean, I guess first I want to thank Doctors Flora and Karuta for a extremely insightful conversation. This is really the discussion that our field needs more of. It's great to hear some thought leadership here, looking ahead with the crystal ball, but also providing insights based on in observations from the field, so to speak. So thanks to everyone who joined us today for the webinar, and to Becker's for hosting it as well.
Yeah, I'll second that. Thank you to the audience for joining today. And of course, Dr. Flora, Dr. Karuta, this was a very candid, grounded conversation. Very much appreciate your time. If anybody wants to learn more about Viz Oncology or see the platform in action, you can head to Viz.ai/oncology and hit contact us, and our team will follow up directly.